and the strangers. My name is Eric, Andrew Erics. I lived once in a city called New York. My mother is Terry Erics. She's in the phone book. If you know the city and you read this, find her. Don't show her this, but tell her I love her and that I'm trying to come home, please. It all started when I decided, around the time that I turned 25, that it was time for me to give up taking my backpack into work. It would make me look more mature, I thought, if I weren't lugging around a book bag everywhere like a high school student. Of course, this meant that I had to give up reading in the subway in the mornings and afternoons, since I couldn't quite fit my paperbacks into a pocket. A briefcase would have been out of line, since I was working in a factory, and messenger bags always seemed a little, I don't know, fruity to me. Too purse-like for my liking. I had an MP3 player which helped pass the time for a while, but when it broke, it would shut down at the end of every song if I didn't skip to the next track manually. I gave that up too. So every morning, I'd sit in the metro for a half hour that dragged on endlessly, with nothing at all to do but watch my fellow passengers. I was slightly shy, so I didn't like to be caught at it. So I'd watch people. Interestingly enough, I quickly discovered that I wasn't the only person in the world who was uncomfortable in public. People covered it up in various ways, but I learned to see through them. I divided them into categories in my head. There were the fidgeters, who couldn't get comfortable, constantly moving their hands, shifting their weight, moving their legs closer to the bench. Then further. They were the most noticeable nervous type. After them were the fake sleepers, who'd take their seat and practically close their eyes in the same second. Most of them weren't really sleeping, though. The real sleepers shifted more, came awake suddenly at stops or after loud noises. The fakes just zoned from the second they sat until the moment the train pulled into their stop. Then there were the MP3 player addicts, the occasional laptop people, the people who traveled in groups and talked too loudly. The cell phone junkies were either very popular or just completely unable to shut up for more than 2 minutes at a time. Just as people watching was threatening to get unbearably boring, I filmed my first incongruity. A middle-aged looking man, brown-haired, average size and weight, and dressed casually. Oddly enough, he seemed almost too normal. He had no remarkable features, no mannerisms, as if he were designed to fade into a crowd. It was that which led me to notice him. I was intentionally trying to see how people acted on the subway, and he didn't act at all. Didn't even react either. It was like seeing someone sitting in front of the television, watching a documentary about fish. They aren't excited, they aren't engaged, but they aren't looking away either. Present, but not accounted for. He was on the subway in the afternoons. It was more than a month into the people-watching experiment before he caught my eye, because I didn't catch the same subway every day, and didn't consciously sit in the same car when I did. I saw him for the first time on a Monday, I believe, and for the second time on the Thursday of the same week. He obviously did catch the same train, and sat in the same car, in the same seat even. OCD much? I thought at the time, since he'd caught my attention so much the first time, I watched him more avidly the next. He was, frankly, downright unsettling. He didn't do anything at all. He sat there expressionless, head straight, no matter what happened. A woman with a wailing child entered the car and sat right behind him, and still nothing. He didn't so much as turn his head or frown in annoyance, and that kid was loud too. By the time the subway reached my stop, I found myself queasy, and when I exited the car, my hands were shaking like I was having a nicotine fit. Something about that man was wrong. He was, I thought, some kind of freak. A sociopath, maybe. One of those quiet guys who, it turned out, has a dozen women's head in his freezer. The first victim, his mother. I found myself intentionally dawdling after work in the afternoons, stopping to browse in kiosks in the mall near the subway, even when I didn't intend on buying anything. For a couple weeks I avoided catching that subway. and when I found myself at the stop when it was pulling in, I made sure to choose a train car as far from the one I'd seen him in as possible. Then one morning, I saw another person who set off the same warning bells in my head. A woman, just as plain-looking, just as out of place and hustle and commotion around her. The moment I recognized her, I realized later, was when my obsession began. My people watching, which had began as a bit of a hobby to stave off boredom, became something of a religion to me. I couldn't enter a subway or ride a bus without finding myself examining everyone, filling out a mental checklist in my head. Plain clothes of solid colors, no brands, check. No expression, no casual glances out the window or towards other passengers, check. No bags, purses, or accessories, check. Check, check, check. We've got another. I started calling them the strangers. I didn't see them every day, even after I started taking the metro more than I needed to, even when I found myself riding buses out of my way in the evenings. But they were there often enough. Seeing one would set my teeth on edge, make my palms sweaty and my throat feel dry. If you've ever given a speech, you might recognize the feeling. Even though they didn't pay me the slightest bit of attention, I felt like I was on display for them. I could see them plain as day. How could they miss me? They didn't, though, not in any way that I could tell. And when eventually my curiosity overpowered my fear, I decided to follow one. I chose the one that I'd found first, the man in the afternoon subway who always kept the same seat. I got on and took a seat behind him. We rode to the end of the line, and he rose and walked out before I did. Keeping distance between us, I tailed him, but he didn't go far. He took a seat on a nearby bench, as expressionless as always, and I turned a corner and waited, trying to look nonchalant. After a few minutes, the next metro arrived, and I watched him enter it, and saw him take the same seat. I couldn't find the nerve to follow him again. He hadn't gone anywhere. He just rode the metro to the end of the line, and then what? Rode it back? What possible reason would anyone have for that? It nagged at me, long after I'd rode a later train back home, and tried to get some rest. I couldn't leave it alone, not until I could make some sense of it. I found myself more than confused. I was downright angry now. Why was this uncanny this almost inhuman person riding subway trains back and forth, going nowhere? The mind, I once read, recoils from certain things because the very sight of them is an affront. Spiders set it off, and a lot of people, particularly great big ones. They just look wrong to us, alien. That was the effect the strangers were beginning to have on me. They offended my senses. I followed him around the next day, and again the day after. Every day, for at least a week, the two of us made our silent trips together, though only I knew it. By the end of the week, I was following him for hours, until the last train that stopped at near my apartment block that night. We rode from one end of the city to the other, then back again. I wasn't people watching any longer. I was person watching, stranger watching. I didn't have eyes for anyone else, though peripherally I noticed more than a few confused glances sent my way. Other than that, we two might have been the only two people on the planet for all I cared. I lost my job the next week. My manager was kind and timid, but firm. I wasn't concentrating. I had no focus. Wasn't being anywhere near productive. It was actually quite a speech, I think, but I could barely hear it. All I could think about was my new work, my vigil. What would that man, no, that thing, on the subway get up to when I wasn't there to keep an eye on him? I left work for the last time at noon that day. Normally, I'd have started tailing my subject at 5:30, but I wasn't sure that he'd be waiting for me. But I was sure that he'd be waiting for me. I wish now that I'd paid more attention to that day. Was it sunny? It was summer, after all. I could have walked around downtown. Maybe checked out a few pretty girls. Could have had an iced cappuccino and a smoke at an outdoor cafe and then gone home. Put my growing obsession out of my head. Found a new job and taken to reading on trains and buses again. Instead, I waited. More than one train goes up and down the lines, so I sat in the station for at least an hour until I saw him through a window. I walked into the subway car and noticed that for the first time my skin wasn't clammy, my hands weren't shaking, and my heart wasn't pounding hard. I sat for the first time right across from him, directly in his line of sight. Watched for a change in his face. Would he recognize me? If he did, I saw no sign of it, and I was looking hard. We must have made quite a pair, sitting across from one another that afternoon, staring into one another. It was hard not to let the building rage in me contort my face, but with effort I was able to keep as still and expressionless as him. Inside, I practically screamed at him, "React to me, you asshole. See me? Damn it. I know you for what you are." I didn't know, and my silent demands weren't answered. Not the first trip around, or the second, or the third, or the 10th. We rode far into the night together, and at each terminus we got out together and waited. I sat right beside him on the bench, watching him from the corner of my eye, and still got nothing from him. But two could play that game as well as one. Finally, we made our last trip together. I had him and knew it. Last trip of the night before the train stopped running. I'd always let him get away from me at that point, because the end of the line is a long way from my home, and the buses stop running at the same time as the subway. But this time, I'd follow him. Finally see what he was when the train stopped running. I'd get some answers, maybe. The subway rolled on, and the anticipation grew in me. The car emptied out around us slowly until it was just we two silent watchers below the city. I fought to keep a manic grin at bay, and the subway train slowed to a crawl, then stopped. The end of the line. The stranger didn't move, still didn't react at all. The car stood still, doors open. I could dimly hear the last few stragglers making their way out of the station somewhere behind us. Footsteps echoing in the silence. Nothing. The speaker system dinged to let anyone half asleep know that we reached the terminus. Still nothing. And finally I could hear footsteps again. A conductor or something. Popping his head into each car to make sure it was empty before the last train, wherever the hell it goes for the night. I didn't take my eyes from my silent quarry. I managed to see the conductor from the corner of my eye when he finally reached our car. He looked in, his eyes roamed over to us, and a puzzled look came over his face. He blinked a few times and paused. I waited for him to speak, and the moment stretched out, but then, with a slight shake of his head, he left us. There was a car ahead of ours, and I heard him stop to check that too, and then a few minutes later, the train started up again. We rode for a time, and then looped around, and the subway was parked. I could see into it and the windows of more trains on either side of us, and through their opposing windows into even more. And then he smiled at me. It was just a small curl of a smile that would have gone unnoticed if I hadn't spent the last several hours studying his face. "So," he said in a rough baritone, "here we are." I tried to respond but couldn't right away. My throat had clamped shut. Terror filled me. It felt like the whole underground cavern we were in had just collapsed onto me. I coughed and stammered and finally managed with a raspy voice to ask the question that had kept me up at night, drove me halfway to madness, and led me to this place in this moment. "What are you?" He ignored me. He stood, and the train doors opened. Then, shockingly, he turned to face me. "Coming?" He didn't wait for an answer, but walked out onto the platform. I scrambled to follow. "Come on, damn it," I shouted. "Talk to me. Who are you? What? Why do you ride the metro all day?" He didn't look back, or slow his step. I couldn't see his face, but it's safe to guess that he didn't react at all. No more than he had to anything else. I stalked after him, still shouting for a time, but eventually gave up. 5 words was all I was going to get out of him, I guessed. We walked along the platform until we came to a junction, then turned. Now we were perpendicular to the trains around us. The path ahead was lit from above, but I couldn't see where it ended. The trains on either side of us went on forever, as far as I could tell. Far too many trains to service one city, I realized. It wouldn't have mattered by then, I figure. but I probably should have paid more attention to that at the time. I'm not sure how long we walked. I had a watch once, but it broke. I took out my cell phone at one point, but got no reception down there, and all it would show me was no signal. The stranger would stop every now and then, and look at a subway car for a minute or two, but then pass on. It took me a while to figure out why, but eventually I saw that they weren't all the same. They weren't all the same. Long lines of them would be similar, and then we'd come to a different model. It'd be a little longer, or smaller, or have a slightly different shape. The cockpits, or whatever you call the front part where the conductor sits, were superficially different as well. I didn't, and I don't know what exactly he was looking for, but eventually he must have found it, because we turned again, and the subway doors opened when my impromptu guide stopped in front of them. We entered and took our seats. "Are you willing to speak now?" I asked him. No answer. I sighed with frustration and seriously weighed the pros and cons of punching him right in the face for a time, when suddenly the lights in the car came on and I heard the engine starting up. "What the—" He gave me a look that was almost sad. "You're not going to be able to go back." "What are you talking about? Go back where?" Still nothing again. The stonewalling axle. The train lurched into motion, pushing off in the opposite direction than the one we came from, I think. The endless parade of them had thrown off my sense of direction. It rolled for a few minutes, and then began to slow as we were approaching the stop. His vacant gaze grew sharper, and for the first time I got the sense that he was actually staring at me, rather than just looking in the direction I happened to be in. "Be still. Be silent. Don't catch their attention." The train stopped, the doors opened, and they began to flood in. I don't know what I noticed first: the weird clothes, the two long arms with hands that almost brushed the floor, the jet-black eyes and angular faces, or the blue-gray hue of their skin. My eyes took in all those stimuli, but for a long second my brain refused to process it. And when it finally did, I was barely able to bite down on the shriek that started to tear its way from my throat. I thought my heart was going to explode. Hell, I thought I was going to explode. I was like a strummed guitar string. Everything in me lurched and throbbed. My sight grew dizzy, which I was thankful for, and I vomited. My mouth was clenched shut, and I forced myself to swallow it, barely managing it. My instincts were screaming his words at me. "Be still. Be silent. Don't catch their attention." That day is a blur. We rode the subway car up and down the line, still and expressionless, for hours, for days perhaps. It seemed much longer than the line I knew, the line I'd followed the stranger along. The hideous things around us seemed to pay us no undue attention, though we must have stood out fiercely. I was so petrified with fear that when we finally returned to the endless cabin of trains alone, I burst into tears. I collapsed to the floor and just sobbed for a long time, the stranger watching impassively. Then I gained control of myself. I looked at him imploringly. "Take me home," I croaked out. "Please." "I can't," he told me. "Don't know which one of these would lead you back, if any of them do." He stood and walked out onto the platform, and I rose wearily and followed him. He spun around sharply. "I think you've followed me enough." The rage I'd felt for him before, that the panic had temporarily buried, rose up in me. "What?" I screamed, rushing forward. I grabbed him by the shoulders, and with a burst of insane strength I didn't even know was in me, slammed him up against the side of a metro car. "You bleep 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 bleep. What the F did you do to me?" I slammed him again and again. "Take me back." He bore it all passively, and soon the flare of anger in me guttered out, leaving me hollow. "Please," I begged, "please take me home." "That's not how it works," he said. "If we stay together, it's more likely that we'll be noticed. Go your own way. Be still and be subtle, and they'll think that you're one of theirs." "How could you do this to me? Why?" He gave me another almost sad look. "I had to. You will too. You get stuck sometimes." He brushed my hands off his shoulder and turned to walk away. I fell to my knees, suddenly out of strength, and watched him leave. At the junction, he turned back to face me. "I'm sorry," and then he was gone. I stayed there on the cold tiles for a very long time. I curled up into a ball and wept for a while. After there weren't any tears left in me, I even managed to get some sleep. When I awoke, the subway train I'd come in was gone, off carrying more blue-gray abominations to wherever blue-gray abominations go. I couldn't handle going back there anyways. I tried to find my way back to where I'd started, to find a subway that I recognized, but I wasn't even sure which direction I should have been going in anymore. I walked for an hour, then another. Finally I found one that might have looked familiar, or I was desperate enough to imagine that it did. When I stepped up to the car, it opened for me, and I took a seat. It started up, and in spite of being a lifelong agnostic, I prayed my heart out. The train slowed to a stop, the doors opened, and for a second I thought I was saved. People, human beings. I'd be the most devout man in the world. Then I noticed the eyes, specifically the third large eye in the center of their foreheads. Well, if you thank God, I thought. They were easier to take than the last bunch, though, and I was thankful for that. The third eye blinked independently of the other two, though, and that was nauseating. And when one of them smiled or laughed or spoke with another, I couldn't help but notice that their teeth were sharp and misshapen and yellow-green with filth. But if I was careful and selectively blind, I could pretend for a stretch that I was home, until one of them entered with a sandwich in hand, and then I realized for the start that I was starving and hadn't eaten or drank in what must have been days. The next terminus I came to, I decided to try and find something to eat or drink. I don't know why I waited, but it seemed important to ride to the end of the line. I got there and could barely bring myself to leave. I'd never seen the stranger leave the underground. I'd never seen him eat or drink either. My stomach would not take no for an answer, though. I steeled myself and tried to keep my face. I steeled myself and I tried to keep my face carefully neutral, which made my way out into the station proper, and then I got confused. I was looking for escalators or stairs. Or something like that, but all I saw was holes in the ground, the walls and the ceiling, gaping irregular-sized holes like I was in the middle of a beehive. What was I supposed to do? Leap into one? It didn't make any sense to me. He frowned for a second, or at least, I think it was probably a frown, but apparently whatever kept them from recognizing me as alien in the subway extended at least this far. It did not, unfortunately, allow me to levitate, which seemed to be the only way out of the subway station beehive thing. Swearing, I made my way back into the tunnel. I was angry, lost, starving, and I'd been abandoned to a fate that, if it wasn't worse than hell, was at least twice as stupid and 3 times as nonsensical. I was not in the best frame of mind, which I feel excuses the mistake. Normally I take corners with a wide berth, because everyone knows that if you just dart around a corner sharply into a public place, chances are decent that you're going to walk right into someone, as I did. I slammed into someone, a woman, and fell to the ground. Without thinking, I reacted like any New Yorker would, badly. Bleep, bleep, you stupid bleep. Watch where you're going. I realized my mistake even before she did. Her eyes grew quizzical and confused, and when she really noticed me, they bulged with horror. She floated quickly, back from me and let out something scream-like. A little more yowly than I was used to, but I got the point. Further down the tunnel, I saw alien 3-eyed heads turning toward us. I thought suddenly about those sharp, filthy teeth, and just like that, I was running. The subway train wasn't there. But there was a walkway along the tunnel for the repairmen, I assume. That's who used it where I'm from anyways. I took it at full speed and just kept running until each breath felt like getting stabbed. I stopped, panting, and looked back. The tunnel had curved, but I couldn't see the light any longer. But nobody appeared to be following me. Going back, though, was not an option. I continued forward in the dark for a long time. Eventually I came to a small opening in the wall and stopped there for a rest. Hunger, despair, and full-speed terrified run had all left me absolutely drained. I probably would have whipped again, which seemed to be all I was capable of lately. It just seemed like too much work. I sat against the wall, legs splayed out, and imagined I was beating that stranger to death with a hammer. It was a relieving image. A rat was shuffling around nearby in the dark. Every so often, I would kick out a foot to scare it away, but after a time I didn't even bother with that. Rabies or any other disease it might be carrying would be a blessing compared to endless traveling through the subways of a strange world, lost, destitute, and alone. When it crept near me again, I didn't shoo it off. Even when it reached and pressed against my leg, I couldn't bring myself to care. Not until a train passed by and the lights of its cars lit up the culvert I was in, and the thing that I had thought was a rat. It was rat-like, yes, but not as much as it was spider-like. If someone had bred the two of them together, the resulting abomination might have been almost as horrible as the thing nuzzling my leg. I shrieked, flung myself up from the floor, and booted it like a soccer player would, right into the opposite wall. Its back made a sickening crunch, and I watched it twitch out its last before the final car passed and the darkness returned. And in the darkness, a terrible thought came to me. I wondered if it was edible. I didn't want to, and I gagged just imagining it, but I was hungry, and there was no guarantee that I'd be able to find food in this place, or ever again. Rat spider was my only option. I held off as long as I could, but in the end, survival trumped squeamishness. I had my lighter, but nothing to light on fire. I picked meat off its carcass and cooked it a little by holding it over the flame, but it didn't help much. Nothing could have. Its meat was foul, more foul than anything you can imagine. I've been that desperate for food since, and eaten many questionable things, but nothing has ever been as bad as the rat spider was. In retrospect, this is when I became a stranger. Before, I'd struggled to reach that expressionless state the other had maintained. What I'd taken for calm was numbness. A sharp rock thrown in a river will, over time, have its edges rounded off by the water beating over it. And what I'd gone through had done the same. Tearing up and eating a monster in the dark below an alien world, the last of any edges smoothed. By the time I left the darkness and came back into the tunnel, I was as expressionless and empty as the one who'd led me here had ever been. That was not the worst of it, though. The worst came later, the first time I got stuck. The stranger had mentioned it, but in the state I'd been in, I hardly noticed. One night, at the end of the line, I almost asked to leave the train. I was asked to leave the train. The world was one of those closer to normal ones. The people were almost human, as I recognized it. They were orange, sure, and hunchbacked, but other than that, they were practically normal. After the last world, where the people had been hideously overweight, six-breasted hermaphrodites with no noses, the orange guys were pretty much beautiful to me. I thought at first that the conductor was talking to someone else, but I was the only one in the car, and moreover, I understood him. The oranges certainly hadn't been speaking English all day, but nonetheless, I could understand what he was saying. When I stood, I began to realize why. I couldn't stand up straight. I was hunchbacked, and as I saw my reflection against the window as I exited Orange, I pieced together the rest from there. Stuck meant that I was trapped in this world, for some reason, stuck looking like them as well. Which would be handy if I wanted to take the opportunity to leave the subway station, which is possible most times, but requires a lot of care and is quite overwhelming. Alien worlds are a little revolting, I found. You try to compare them to your own, but the differences are so vast that it just makes you sick. I left that subway anyways because it wasn't clear I wasn't returning to the central hub, what I'd taken to call the infinite line of subway trains that night. Or any other night, I soon found out. Whatever had let me go unnoticed wasn't working any longer. I considered briefly staying, but this place wasn't home and never could be. Even if they looked like me, their culture was bound to be different. That was a lesson I learned before. Even worlds where the people were absolutely indistinguishable from me are fraught with danger. I was once in a world where the people looked just like me. Well, actually, they looked Brazilian, but that was more than close enough. And learned the hard way that the gesture that to me means hello, means something gravely insulting. Insulting enough that I'd been beaten half to death while a crowd looked on with approval. Besides, even if that place had a culture I could fake, I didn't want to stay. I wanted one of two things. to find my way home, or to find the stranger who'd set me on this path and beat the crap out of him. Nothing else would do. So I wanted to move on. I wasn't sure, though, if I could do to some poor sucker what had been done to me. Could I really force someone else to wander the eternal underground like me? It turned out I didn't have to. After a few months, one of them did notice me, yes, and began to follow me for weeks. I very carefully made it seem like I hadn't seen him, just like the stranger had. But I was torn between the desire to warn him away and the desire to bring him to the end of the line so I could leave this dismal world already. But last night, he followed me to the end of the line just as I had done once. He hadn't managed to work up the nerve to sit right across from me, though. And as soon as the train stopped at the terminus, he rushed off. I waited, hoping the conductor wouldn't see me and I could continue on, but to no avail. I left the car and the metro rushed off without me, and I cursed inside. As I walked around the corner towards the ticket booths, the young man who'd been following me attacked. He had a wicked curved knife and should have caught me by surprise, but I'd been traveling through hostile, alien worlds for several years. My reflexes were sharp. We struggled viciously before I managed to wrestle the knife from him. I don't know how it got in his neck. I don't think I wanted to kill him. I hadn't even been that angry, remembering my own building rage for so long now. Afterwards, as he lay there, bled out, I got pissed. I kicked him repeatedly, shouting, "You dick, you were supposed to to follow me, kick." I fled the scene of the crime, and not for long. I was there bright and early the next day to catch the first subway of the morning, and that night, when I rode it to the end of the line, I was invisible to the conductor again. I guess you can either kill them or bring them with you if you want to return to the central hub. I was invisible again, but I was also orange and hunchback still. I stayed that way until the next time I became stuck. The next time I killed. That one went much faster. I didn't wait for her to follow me. Once I was recognized as a stranger, I recognized her as the next one, and I made my choice. I won't bring anyone else into this. It makes me wonder, though, about the stranger who abducted me. I wonder what he originally looked like, and whether he knew he could have killed me. I wonder, too, about the others I saw back home, and the rare few I come across since I left. Do they kill them, or take them? And whichever one they choose, did they consider it a mercy? I can't bring myself to talk to them, to ask. We're damned either way, and the damned should suffer in solitude. I've killed 15 of them now, and I've gotten very good at it, but I've made a decision. I'm done killing. Innocents, at least. Before I returned to the central hub, I filled a backpack with as much paper as I could cram into it, and I wrote this story. Over and over again, to be left in as many subway trains as I can. A couple thousand messages in bottles cast into a sea of steel rails. This is a request and a warning. My request above was that you find my mother and tell her a lie. It's a white lie, don't worry. Tell my mother that I love her, and that I'm trying to come home. It may give her some hope or a small measure of peace. I wish it were true, too. But here's the thing. I've been thinking of myself as like Odysseus, lost and adrift, looking to return to familiar shores. But I am not lost at sea. I am lost in endless tunnels, the labyrinth. The difference is important because labyrinths are designed, built. Somebody or something made this impossible place. But they must be held accountable for what they've done to me. And they cast me as Theseus, not Odysseus. But I won't play that part any longer either. The strange rules of this place have turned me from the human I began, as into something else, and something else again. They have made me a monster, and so I will be the minotaur of this labyrinth, and if I can, I will tear it down around me and destroy those that built it. My warning is that you should be very wary in public places of silent, expressionless men and women. Keep your distance. They may kill you, or they may do worse. If you see them, run far and fast. And even more importantly, I warn you, I beg you, don't ride the train to the end of the line. I have one more here that's hopefully better than the first one. Not sure how long this is up to now. On the The streets, roads, and dusty lanes of Colombia have been fertile territory for myths and legends since before the arrival of the Spaniards. Tales of La Patasola, a one-legged wailing banshee that forever sought her child, and of El Duende, a backwards-footed goblin that led travelers to their doom, nibbled at the corners of journeyman's ease for centuries. Although these stories mainly troubled those living in or passing through rural areas, the growth of cities brought with it a new breed of urban legend rooted in the primal distrust we still harbor, somewhere deep inside of modern technology. An example of this is the phantom bus that allegedly roams the city streets at night. Supposedly, young women who boarded alone are found mutilated and overgrown outlying fields a few days later. A frozen look of abject terror illustrating the moment of their last tormented breath. That being said, given that you're certainly not a young woman, at least not last time you checked, and that it's 5:30 on a Tuesday afternoon, phantom buses and handicapped gremlins are the last thing on your mind. You've been using Bogota's public transportation system for over 2 decades, and your greatest concern is that traffic levels have become all but unmanageable since the last mayor took office. However, home is about 80 blocks away, so your only choice is to wait until the right bus comes along. Walking would certainly take longer than putting up with any traffic jam. When the bus displaying the route sign you're hoping for shows up, an advertised fare is 200 pesos, lower than the standard going rate these days. This usually indicates that the vehicle in question is older and a bit more uncomfortable than most. But no bus rider in the history of the city has ever given a damn about that. Folks that consider themselves richer and above this mode of transportation pay 7 times as much to get around by cab, and statistically expose themselves to a higher chance of being mugged or robbed. More power to them, right? Never one to avoid seeking further discounts, you ask the wizened driver if he'll let you on for 1,000. The wrinkled, musty-looking man's eyes never leave the road as he silently takes your bill and slides it in the purse hanging from the bony gear shift. Satisfied, you turn your attention to the cabin. What would make this ride ideal would be an empty seat. Curiously enough, considering the time of day, there weren't enough passengers aboard for anybody to be standing. A few available spots are in sight, so you choose one on the left towards the middle. Both the aisle and the window are seat-free, and you sigh contentedly as you sprawl out on one of your knees nested on the other. This particular trip should be over in no time. The driver's radio is off and your phone's battery ran out an hour ago, so you pass the time staring out the window and watching vendors ply their wares and car drivers nod along to whatever music they're enjoying. Your position eventually starts taking a toll on your back, so you straighten up and take the chance to examine your fellow passengers. None of them seems to be riding together, given that everybody's quietly facing the front of the bus. They are also all uncommonly old. Not in the sense that they're all over 100, but in the sense that nobody seems to be under 75. You find this a bit odd, and for a brief moment the idea that you don't belong there flashes through your mind. It's a silly thought, but combined with the bus's particularly strong, although not necessarily atypical, smell of must and metal, it makes you look forward to the end of the trip. Nevertheless, as there are another 30 or 40 blocks to go, you look out the window again, zone out, and let your mind go where it will for a while. The sight of Paco's bakery pulls you out of your reverie 20 minutes later. You get up and make your way past your silent companions to the rear exit, where you hunt for the little silver button that will let the driver know you've reached your stop. As you spot it above the door, you realize that nobody's boarded or left the vehicle since you got on, which is particularly weird for rush hour. Shrugging it off as a weird coincidence, you press on the button and grab onto something. You are sitting on your seat, facing the front of the bus. What the hell just happened? You looked around and see that everybody's still there, where they were a moment ago. Trying to make eye contact with them is fruitless, since they all seem to be lost, wherever it is that old minds wander. The thought of saying something runs through your head, but you decide against it. What would you say, anyway? You were probably so zoned out that you simply imagined getting up to ring the driver's bell. That's probably it. Your daydreams are occasionally so vivid that believing them is downright startling. Besides, you're already 2 blocks past your stop. Call it a weird thing that happened on your way home, or whatever. But for now, you should just get off the bus. There's no point in having to walk back too far. You, once again, get off your seat and head for the rear exit, somewhat unnerved by the other passengers' stoic disinterest in everything around them. There's the button, right where you remember it, except that you can't remember it, of course, since you've never actually been back here. You probably saw it when you got on. After grabbing onto the guardrail, these things occasionally decide to stop on a dime when you ring. You look toward the driver. Put your thumb on the button. You are sitting on your seat, facing the front of the bus. A piercing chill runs down your spine, and instead of fading away, it spreads through every one of your extremities. It's not a shift in body or ambient temperature. It's the chill you feel when suddenly consumed by the level of fear that slightly precedes terror. Something really messed up is going on here. You don't know what it is, but you want out. You don't want to be here anymore. A feeling of bitter solitude is now gnawing at your mind. Whatever these people around you are thinking, they clearly don't give a damn about what's going on with you. Therefore, you once again decide to avoid saying anything stupid and lift yourself off the seat, not processing the fact that you did it with less agility than should have been the case. All you want right now is to get off the bus. Besides, it's already advanced more than 10 blocks past your street, which suddenly feels like a distastefully long distance to walk. This is all secondary to the point at hand, however. You have to get off this damn thing. As you make your way back, an old lady in the front row looks up at you. Her expression tells you nothing, but the way it fixes on you, on your torso, to be precise, as if you were just another chunk of the vehicle, further spikes the almost overpowering sense of dread now coursing through your veins. Whatever, you can't panic, not now. You stand at the back of the bus, and instead of going on for the button, yell at the driver. You yell at him to stop, to let you off. You've already rung twice, but nothing comes of it. You curse at him, tell him that he will die, tell him what he will die of, and wish great evil upon his kin, but the door remains unmoved. The man is not listening, or he doesn't care, or he doesn't want you to get off. But you don't give a damn what he wants or doesn't want, so you grab onto the bars, take a step back for a momentum, and send a solid kick right into the column of hinges. That you are sitting on your seat, facing the front of the bus. It takes a moment to register. Maybe more than a moment, maybe it's a full minute. And as you realize that the bus doesn't want you to leave, you also realize that your right knee hurts with an unnatural piercing sharpness. It's the same leg you used against the door, and now it feels like it's all but broken. This quickly becomes a distant concern when you attempt to massage it, though, because that's when you notice your hands. These are not the hands of a 25-year-old. They are wrinkly, set with well-defined veins, and even lightly patched with liver spots. As you study your hands and arms, cold terror envelops every corner of your psyche. You touch your face and feel wrinkles and whiskers that didn't previously exist upon your cheekbones. Your head is patched with a few anemic strands of hair. As your fingertip grazes your coarse scalp, a spark of electricity shoots through it and down into the most private recesses of your being. Your eyes dry up, opened wide and unbelieving, and you feel a 7-ton lump of horror coalesce in your otherwise paralyzed throat. You must leave this evil bus. You must leave it at once before it finishes what it's begun. Sorry, pages are sticking. You carefully make your way off your seat. No need for any further injury, and head towards the front, towards the driver. Perhaps you can reason with him. Perhaps you can club him to death with a flashlight or something, since there's always a variety of trinkets and gadgets at the front of the... You are sitting on your seat, facing the front of the bus. It takes a good 5 or 10 minutes for you to come to terms with what is happening to you, to understand that your life is vanishing before your eyes. Your hands are now like those of your grandmother. Your back hurts from its base all the way up to your neck, and your eyes can barely focus on the huge signs posted above the windows. Even your mind isn't as sharp as it should be. It takes you a while to determine that you should make another attempt at the exit. Perhaps violence is not the answer. Perhaps you can gently pull it off. Perhaps if you treat the bus like a living, gentle being instead of like a demonic machine, it will let you out. Perhaps. The old woman is looking at you again. You notice her blue jacket, which is much too big for her. If it were a blouse of the same size, it would hang loosely off her gaunt frame. A tiny hesitant tear forms on her frail face, and then follows a meandering path down her ancient features, to land on her wrist with eerie finality. There's a red tattoo watch around that wrist, the sort that is currently all the rage with kids graduating from high school. You examine the door, 2 panes joined by a vertical line of hinges, coated on the right by a rubber band to avoid contact damage. The door is slightly bent inwards, and as you notice this, a glimmer of hope runs through you. If you can just insert, you are sitting on your seat, facing the front of the bus. What the F is going on? My hands, they are old. My hands are the hands of an old man, not of my grandfather, of an old, the man behind you starts when you turn to him and yell at him and grab his face and screams at him to let you off. He mouths something you don't understand. His teeth, his blood, your teeth. Oh my God, my teeth are like tiny, they're dust. What the hell? How long have I been here? F this, I'm breaking the window with my elbow. Even if it breaks, I don't want to die here no more. You are sitting on your seat, facing the front of the bus. After a long time, you glance down at your hands. They are gnarled, rheumatic, blood-spattered, claws of a hag that have seen more than one generation's share of horrors. A hag? A hag is not the right word. A hag is a woman, right? At least so it is in Mother's stories, like those of La Patasola. Your knee still hurts, but not as much as your elbow. It feels like it is shattered. Ah yes, this bus. You must get off it. You know you must get off it now. You do not remember why you must, but it is imperative that you do. It is urgent. It was urgent. You are so tired. You try to lift yourself off the seat, but your knee buckles under your weight. It is by chance that you fall back on the bench. You must get off the bus. You remember these buses. They used to take you to work. You steady yourself on the bench. You will try to get off the bus, but in a moment you must rest. The bus can wait. You are sitting on your seat, facing the front of the bus. You are sitting on your seat, facing the front of the bus. Okay. Those were both kind of lame, but I didn't read them before I printed them out. So, yeah. Hopefully you're asleep by now, at least. So, I never know how to end these. I'll try to make more videos. My problem is I'm having trouble finding time when I'm alone and it's quiet to make the videos. I only get 1 day a week to do that. I usually have other things to do. So, yes, I'll try to be around more often, I promise. Love you all. Happy Halloween.